All right, in today's lesson, we're going to talk about a very important cellular process which involves the death of cells. And this cellular process is called apoptosis. Just like I said, it's a very important cellular process. And the reason we talk about apoptosis is because it's all about cell signaling, which is this area of the study design we're looking at. Pause the video here and have a go at these three quick questions, and we'll go through them together in class. So in the study design, we want to talk about apoptosis as a natural regulatory process of programmed cell death. Okay, it's purposeful cell death, and it's initiated after a cell receives a signal either from the inside, which is called the mitochondrial pathway, or from the outside, which is called the death receptor pathway. Okay, lots of the stuff in apoptosis has some pretty cool names. The cell resulting in the removal of cells that are no longer needed or that may not be a threat to an organism. Or that may be a threat to an organism. And this is all mediated by different enzymes that we call caspases. Okay, it's pretty much controlled by these enzymes. And they cleave specific proteins in the cytoplasm or nucleus. Really important is that details of specific cytoplasmic or nuclear proteins are not required. So you have to know this group of proteins called caspases, but I'm going to refer to caspase 9, caspase 3, and you don't really have to know those specific caspase names. And then also we're going to have a quick chat about malfunctions in apoptosis that leads to different diseases, especially cancer. Okay. All right, so we all start our lives really as a single-celled zygote, okay? And this is the result of the fertilization of your father's sperm and your mother's egg together. All right, we know that from last year. Okay. So eventually, through the cell division and differentiation, we actually begin to resemble what we know to be called a fetus, which looks like a bit of a blob of human, okay? But this little blob of human can't actually just develop into what looks like us, all right? To actually develop these intricate features like our fingers that we have, all right? Our body needs to selectively grow in specific areas, for example, the hand, but then it actually needs to destroy specific area. For example, here we can see that we start off having hands that look like webbed like hands, but eventually these cells that are in the middle of this area here, they die. All right, and this is a programmed death. How they die is through this process called apoptosis, all right? And apoptosis is a natural process that's really essential for growth and development, where a cell is destroyed by its own actions, so the cell kills itself, and this is due to either extrinsic, so outside signals, or intrinsic, so inside signals, okay? Apoptosis is also called programmed cell death. Okay. So when does apoptosis occur? So apoptosis is really important for our survival and doesn't actually only occur just during embryonic development. It's just very important during embryonic development. But other examples of apoptosis is, for example, if you incorrectly manufacture immune cells, they'll be rejected, all right? And this is really important because this is how we get diseases that attack our own body if we can't destroy these immune cells that were made poorly. Sun-damaged cells are destroyed and replaced by healthy cells, all right? We prevent anything bad happening by doing this. Specialization of neural pathways during pruning in adolescence. You might have heard of pruning, which is a process where specific neurons of our brain are selected for. How they're selected for is through the process of apoptosis. And also age cells, so old cells, they have very, very small telomeres, which is the end of the chromosome. They die to avoid any errors in the genetic code. So what actually happens to the cell during apoptosis is called blebbing. I love that word. And what blebbing is a shrinkage of a cell because the cytoskeleton, that protein structure of a cell, breaks down, right? And so the cell does what this cell here is doing. Watch. It's going to do it again. So it's a good cell here, and bam. All right, that's the blebbing process. The cell pretty much shrinks on itself. All right, and the DNA in the nucleus and the chromosomes are all really fragmented, have to be destroyed up. Okay. So let's go through the process of apoptosis. All right. First, we get what's called a pro-apoptotic signal. Okay, and what a pro-apoptotic signal is a signal such as this little blue thing, and that's going to tell the cell to do apoptosis. This signal, like this, can come from outside the cell, but also the signal can come from inside the cell from mitochondria. Okay, different caspases, which are called the apoptotic enzymes, are activated within the cell, and this actually activates other caspases. Okay, and so it goes through like a cascade process like this, right? And then finally, these caspases activate apoptosis, and so the cell is degraded by these various caspases, causing the shrinking of the cell and the blebbing that we just talked about. Okay, and then finally, so this is a blebbed up, shrunken cell. Finally, we'll have something like this, which is a macrophage. A macrophage, which is going to eat up this cell. Okay. All right. Have a go at watching this video that Weihai made. It's really handy, and it actually breaks up the process of apoptosis very well. It goes into more detail than we need, but it's a really good visualization. All right, let's talk about the two different pathways to get apoptosis started. First, let's talk about the intrinsic or the mitochondrial pathway. So because the cell might have some really irreparable DNA damage or some kind of stressor, for example, a virus, radiation, or it's been deprived of glucose, for example, pores on the mitochondria, on the outer membrane of the mitochondria, remember the mitochondria has two membranes, they open up and start releasing what we call cytochrome C, okay? This cytochrome C is going to join up with other different caspase compounds, all right? So this is one form of these caspases, and this is going to form what we call the apoptosome, okay? The apoptosome is then going to go up and activate a different caspase, caspase 9, all right, which is then going to activate my favorite kind of caspase, which is called the executioner caspase. The executioner caspase goes on to break down the cytoskeleton of the cell and to cause that blebbing to happen, and we're going to get some apoptosis. So that's the mitochondrial pathway. The most important part we know is that it's starting at the mitochondria to go and do these different processes. The extrinsic pathway, or the aptly named death receptor pathway, all right, is when we get a death ligand. Remember, a ligand is a type of signaling molecule that has a specific receptor for it. So this death ligand, which is associated with cytotoxic T cells, which is a type of white blood cell, is going to bind to the death receptor on the surface of the cell. Okay, and here is what we have happening. Here's the death ligand, and here's that death receptor. All right, the death receptor is going to activate caspase 8, which is a different kind of caspase, which in turn is going to activate more of these executioner caspases, which will in turn do the breakdown of the cell. So break down the cytoskeleton, cause that blebbing to happen. Okay. So as you notice here, the extrinsic pathway is happening because we have an outside signal, which is this pro-apoptotic ligand, the death ligand. So let's talk about what happens when apoptosis goes wrong. Okay, too much apoptosis actually causes a variety of diseases to the relevant section of the body, such as if we have too much apoptosis in the brain, we get what's called Parkinson's disease, which is the shaking disease, and Alzheimer's disease, which is obviously a disease where you forget a lot of things. Famous actor has Parkinson's disease is Michael J. Fox, which is what this little GIF is about. Also, unregulated loss of immune cells, called the T helper cells, leads to acquired immune deficiency disease, so AIDS. Okay, so that's also a malfunction in apoptosis. Most importantly, what the study design wants you to know about is apoptosis and its cause in cancer. All right, so too little apoptosis leads to abnormal accumulation of different cells. And this abnormal accumulation, what we can see in the middle here of this GIF, is what we call a tumor. All right, it's a uncontrolled growth of cells. All right, So what happens here is pretty much the cells can't properly process those death signals, and because of that, we're going to get a bad growth of cells, and that's going to cause lots and lots of problems depending on the area of the body that we're talking about.